Are finishing up their little meeting, and while they're coming, I wanted to introduce the people who are going to be joining our committee today. And the first one is carrying on a conversation down here now, is brand new. He's going to get up for you and sing. Scho Blackman, welcome to the committee. Press your button down there, Scho, if you will. And I'm not going to make you sing. Just tell us about yourself.
Well, just from District 146, Houston County. Got some really big shoes to fill. Larry O'Neill is in that seat before me. Excited to be with you.
And we're proud to have you on the committee. We also have, is Marie Metz here? She has not made it in yet. She's also brand new to the committee. I'd like to let you know that Ahmad, are you in the back? Yeah, he was. He left. He's our aide, and the political analyst Jordan Reed was. I think he stepped out for a moment as well and is coming back. There he is. Excuse me. Jordan Reed's back here behind us. But as we kick off this brand new year, it's going to be an interesting year, and we also have someone from the governor's office. Tell us about yourself. Taylor, appreciate you coming. See if I can stop this feedback. And I think in the interest of time, while the senators are finished their meeting, we're going to go ahead and get started if I can. Scott, if you'll stand up and introduce your crowd. What we're going to hear from today from the ARC is any and all information, brand new, I might add. Some of the stuff is going to be brand new. And I'd like to turn it over to Scott. Is this our new member? Okay. Marie? Yes, ma'am. It's your turn to sing. Tell us about yourself.
Okay. It's very simple. My name is Marie Robinson Metz, hyphenated Metz. And I represent District 55. In District 55, I was told recently that there are almost, 50,000 individuals in District 55. And it starts E.L. Rivers Elementary School in Buckhead and expands all the way to South Fulton at Deerfield Academy. That's it.
Good deal. Well, thank you. And as tradition, as I turn it over to you, Scott, typically the vice chairman of this committee runs the show. So the new vice chairman of the committee is Representative Terry Rogers, and you have the horn. We'll trade seats.
Great.
And you can have that one.
Oh, I can have turn your own mic on, Terry. I'm telling you. All right. I ought to be prepared for this. I chaired a study committee on short-term rentals this past summer. I'm prepared for anything. So, Mr. Chairman, appreciate your leadership. Appreciate everybody being here. This is going to be a good session, a fast and furious session. We're going to start it off real fast. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which one is it up there?
Yeah, let's see. Here we go.
There we go.
I got you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Stevens. We absolutely appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Scott Haggard. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for the Atlanta Regional Commission, also known as the ARC. We are the 10-county planning agency for the Metro Atlanta area, so we're one of the regional commissions, one of the 12 regional commissions in the state of Georgia. Then we also serve a number of other roles related to federal designations as far as transportation, aging, workforce development. And so we have a lot of purview or a lot of different areas that we deal with. And so we have some information that we're going to present to you today. I want to introduce a couple of people to you, though. A lot of you may know Linda Hamrick right here, who you'll see with me during the session quite a bit. She assists ARC with legislative matters. So if you hear from her, know that it's on behalf of ARC as well. And then Mike Alexander here, who is has most recently been our division manager for research and analytics, and recently promoted actually to director of our Center for Livable Communities. And so we're excited for his promotion, but he's a great presenter, so he's going to be doing most of the presenting, and I just want to encourage you to, lift whatever you can from the information we provide you. One of the reasons that we have so much information in these different areas is because we are a planning agency. And so we're required to plan many years into the future, look at demographics, economics, sort of the way trends are going. And so a lot of what we're going to show you is things that we're seeing in real data. And so it's interesting information that I hope will shed some light on looking at economic development in the future. We have a lot of information that we're going to be presenting on jobs and the types of jobs that are being sought in the state of Georgia, the types of skills that are being asked for. So it's a lot of good stuff for economic development. And here for the second day of session, it may be a little heavy for you, but we'll try to keep it kind of light. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike Alexander.
Chairman, committee members, thank you so much for your time. If I can't inform you, I promise you I'm going to try to entertain you along the way. I appreciate the starboard reference. We've had that as a struggle in our own family as we try to learn to sail on Lake Lanier. And of course, I'm recovering from last night growing up near Clemson, obviously with a P, Clemson with a P. I am suffering. And I went to Auburn, which makes it doubly bad for me. So that's the truth of it. I know, wow, right? So again, this really isn't about Metro Atlanta. This presentation is about the state of Georgia. So we've built some very interesting, I think, visualizations that hopefully will entertain you. And the real purpose of this presentation, again, is to hopefully spark you to want more information, because that's what we're really about, is trying to provide great information for you, especially related to your own districts, to help you with the information you need to make great decisions. So, of course, the first thing we're going to talk about is state-level population growth. And what I've done is I'm going to hit play here in a second. And this is actually a video, and the bubbles are going to move if you haven't seen this already. This is brand new. I did show this to a few of you a few weeks ago. But I think it's very entertaining, and it speaks to this idea of Georgia, I think, in a really positive way. So, again, what you're looking at is the total population of the states in 2015, right? So California, Texas, Florida are the largest states. And if you look back, Georgia is in 8th. North Carolina is just behind us. That's very important as I hit play. I'm going to walk you through that, and we're going to hit play and let this thing go, because it's going to immediately shift to the year 1900. So we have 10 million people living in the state of Georgia today. In 1900, New York was the largest state, so pay attention to the way New York grows. And so now the bubbles are changing. Both axes are population. So let's see how the states have grown through time. You see the years are changing. And right in the 1920s and 30s, the Great Depression and oil, California takes off and really passes the other states, passes New York in the 1950s. Then air conditioning. So Texas, Florida, Georgia, the southern states become habitable. And so they really take off in their growth. And you see Florida and that explosive growth in Florida. And this is actually into our forecast now. So the year is 2040, 2050. So by 2050, we expect Georgia to be the 6th largest state in the union. So what about the southern states after air conditioning? So look at Florida's growth. And we think about infrastructure requirements and all the stuff that we do at the state policy level. Florida's growth has been absolutely exceptional. And then you're starting to notice North Carolina, because we're a competitive state. And so if we take the Florida out and we go gatorless, what does that look like? Right? So Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina are hanging through the 80s. In the 90s, we passed North Carolina. So we're larger than North Carolina. And then in the forecast years, really, Georgia and North Carolina are competing right up there to get into that top area. And at the back end of the forecast, North Carolina passes us just slightly. So in this data, the Woods and Pool forecast data, they expect North Carolina to be slightly larger in total population. But you can see, when you think about relative growth rates, at the back of the pack, of course, are some of the smaller southern states that just aren't really, in these forecast series, expected to grow near as much as the state of Georgia and North Carolina, right? So that's very important for to understand from an economic development perspective, right? We've done quite well. We've been a great growing state. Things are looking great right now, and we can see out into the future who naturally is going to be with us in that growth pattern that we expect, right? So if anybody's got any great questions, I'll be happy to take them along the way. This is your conversation. So at the state level, and of course we did printouts for you guys, and we're going to provide this as a PowerPoint Dropbox link that you'll be able to download yourself. We've got a few screens up here as well. because we wanted to put a lot of states on this, so I know it's complicated, to get at this idea by race and ethnicity, how we've been growing lately. So who are the engines by race and ethnicity that have driven our population growth since 2010?
Michael, can I interrupt you just
Yeah,
a second?
please.
For members of the committee, we've got a lot of information to cover, and he's covering it. If you have a question at any time during this, if you'll just go ahead and push your button,
Absolutely.
we'll pause and take the question. So anyway,
Love questions. Thank you, sir.
great. I
Thank
thought
you.
I was watching like pari-mutuel betting there for a while, the way these things are going.
No, but that's the point. We want you to stay with us, right?
Great.
It's more
so if
than
you have a question, please push the button. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
No. Okay, so here's Georgia in population growth. So most of our population growth has been actually in Black and Hispanic. Very little white population growth, and I'm going to explain why in a few seconds. So what I did was I just added a bar that shows the net population change. So places like California, New York, older northeastern states have declining white populations, right? So any population growth they experience is actually associated with other than white races and ethnicities. And that's critical to understand because most of the population growth in the big three is in minority populations. So what we've done this time, and this is new for everyone, is that we built a chart that shows you the population change for all of the metropolitan areas in the state of Georgia. So now we can actually see how those populations are growing compared to all the other metros, and we think this is a really interesting way to look at it. So take a second to look. They're alphabetized from the bottom of the sheet to the top of the sheet. And of course, Atlanta's on a slightly different scale. So of course, we want to put that. So this is the change from 2000 to 2015. So Metro Atlanta has obviously added 1 million people, but Augusta obviously has added the largest number of net new residents. But again, Savannah and Chattanooga are right there with Augusta in net population growth. Some of the smaller metros aren't growing as much, but again, Savannah, Augusta have been leading the way in population growth. Okay, so why is population growing the way it's growing, right? And so I made this video to explain the core demographics of being human on this planet over the last 200 years. And that sounds pretty dramatic, but it really is that way. So what you're seeing, and it's hard to see the year up there, but the year is actually 1800. This is total fertility on the bottom axis, so how many children each woman has. So back then in 1800, the average woman would have about 7 births in her lifetime. And you could expect to live, your total life expectancy was 40 years. So let's hit play and see how this changes over time.
Michael, we're being joined by the Senate, so I'll tell you what we're going to do.
Take a
Senator
pause.
Watson. Want to introduce the new chair of the Economic Development and Tourism Committee for the Senate, Senator Beach, and I'm going to change places with you, actually, and let you run the meeting.
I thought you were running it.
No, we're going to let you
Okay.
have.
Well, good. I apologize for being late. We had to attend something with the Speaker Pro Tem. So, but we've got a couple more committee meeting members that will be coming in. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm looking forward to chairing this committee and helping with economic development in the region and the state. So go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, so we're going to hit play again. And of course, remember the United States, and that's why this is maybe the hardest one to see. It's up here on the right. 1800, you live to be about 40, and again, the total fertility rate was 7. So let's see how the countries have changed over time. So I'm going to hit play. Think of big world events when you hit play. So now the years are going to start to change, right? So see the United States, actually the fertility rate is already starting to fall. It's below 6. Rebellion in China, civil war in the United States dropped the life expectancy pretty dramatically. And then industrialization in the United States, all the countries are really starting to move up in life expectancy and reduced fertility rate. Spanish influenza takes almost every country down. And then after World War II, things get really better. So all the countries now in the 1950s are going to start to take off and move up into those upper brackets. So look at that fertility rate falling, and then look at life expectancy growing. Of course, by 2012, you're living twice as long, and you're having dramatically fewer children, right? So That's a great thing on the longevity part. That's the first time in forever we're going to have a large older population, and that's a big part of the economics of growth at the state level is that fundamental change, right? So, and what this reflects back to on the fertility rate is the fertility rate has fallen for all races or ethnicities. Almost all races or ethnicities now are below replacement birth level, and that's that magic 2.1 number. So if you're thinking about growth and you're thinking about economic growth is about people. And we're really not adding people to the population of the United States anymore because of fertility. And that sets an expectation for total population change by race or ethnicity. And that's what those blue bars are, is that that's a change from now until 2040 by race or ethnicity for the United States, the 20-county forecast area for Atlanta, and the rest of Georgia. So white population decline, that's a fertility rate, and then, of course, balanced growth in all the other race and ethnicity. Still strong white majorities in all of these different geographies, but fundamentally we're going to grow differently than we have in the past, and that sets a tone for economic growth. So when you put that together at the state level, you get a good solid map. This is Woods and Pool data. And you see the Gwinnett counties and the metropolitan areas are where most of the population growth is obviously going to occur. Now, I want to stop making this joke, but it is a good joke and it cracks everybody up. If you build a lake, old people will move there, right? And that's what this map actually shows. And the truth is, I got to go out to Reynolds Plantation, right? And we were talking about this earlier before the meeting started. I went out to Reynolds Plantation. They let me in. I was kind of surprised. And I realized there's a big billboard that says urology services on the way in to Reynolds Plantation. And I thought, what is going on? And they are, right? So as it turns out, they'll go out. They'll have multiple days of clinics out at Reynolds Plantation. And you can see Reynolds Plantation out on I-20. Because the blues are the older, that's the higher median ages across the state. This is brand new data. And of course, the red areas, the big red areas, are our military bases. So people ask me all the time, where are the millennials? I say they're in the military. They're in college or they're in the military. And you can see that so clearly on this map. Now, Georgia, relatively speaking, is a young state, and that's a great thing. But there are clearly areas economically that are driven by these big demographic characteristics that we can see so clearly on this map. And you see this as well. And this is a complicated chart, but it actually works out real simple. So gold is metropolitan Atlanta, blue is the nation, and this is ages, right? So the top is the older age groups. And what that really shows you is we don't have that many older Americans in metropolitan Atlanta or Georgia when we compare ourselves to the rest of the nation. We have in metropolitan Atlanta and Georgia a lot of Generation Xers, that's me. Hopefully not as many of them has lost their hair at such a young age as I did, but we are a dominant part of the demographic picture of metropolitan Atlanta and the state. And then, of course, if you look at the rest of Georgia, millennials everywhere, right? See those big red bars sticking out? That's millennials, right? So think of the University of Georgia, West Georgia College, all these places where there's lots of college students, or you're in the military, it dominates the demographics. And you have a much higher share of the millennials than the nation. And that trend's going to continue, and that's what this is really all about. So as we age into our older age groups, the boomers and Generation Xers, because we have such a high share of millennials, that bodes well for our economy. We're going to have a healthy working age population, and that's what I really want to focus on is that red bar right there. So that bodes well for us, right? This is the core working age population, and we have higher shares than the rest of the nation because there will be states at the national level that are going to get much older over the next 20 years, and they're going to have a hard time economically being as productive because you want to hit a sweet spot, right? You want to have lots of people in the working age group to support more people in the older age groups and still more children in these forecasts as well. So this is critical. All right, so what if we drill race and ethnicity down to the metropolitan area as well? I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I wanted you to see the breakdown by metropolitan areas. I think it's really interesting information. Of course, Atlanta's on a different scale, so I put it above, but you can look at the Macons and the Daltons and the Albanys and see that change and compare it to a place like Savannah or Augusta where you're just seeing a lot of population growth in all races or ethnicities. So there are big pattern differences across the state in the way we're growing at the metropolitan level, and we need to be aware of that. And so that leads to this race and ethnicity that you see today. And you can take more time to look at this in detail. Of course, you're going to get the PowerPoint. Hopefully everyone's got the printout, but you'll see most of the metropolitan areas still have a share of white population that's above 50%. And then we put it all together in this map that I still really like. It took me a long time to figure out how to do this kind of mapping. But you see clearly that spatial pattern of race and ethnicity. Each dot represents 6 people. So purple is white, non-Hispanic in this case. Black alone is green. So you can see the pattern across the state. If there's black underneath it, it's because there just aren't that many people living in that county or area. So that's the spatial distribution by race or ethnicity. And places like Gwinnett, obviously, and Greene County, which we were talking about, Stewart County, I mean, are very, very diverse places. All right, we're going to get quickly to economics. And so last thing, this is future diversity, right? So these are our forecasts. So you can see the metropolitan Atlanta area where that share of white population will give way mostly to increases in Hispanic population and similar but not as dramatic changes for the rest of the state. And if you put it all together, this is our forecast for race or ethnicity change at the state level. So the white share going from 70% down to 45% at the state level over the next 25 years. Okay, shifting gears a little bit. We just went to some new testing at the state level, and I'm not an expert on the testing methods. I am pretty good at taking that data and making maps out of it. And so that's what we've done here, is just to show you this is the future of your economy, is how well our students are doing in school. And I know you're going to spend a lot of time working on this as an issue this year in the legislature. So we took the new milestones test, and this is 3rd grade EL mean scale score for every school in the state. So this represents every elementary school mapped. And I think we're the only place that does this kind of mapping. So you can see that the higher scores in blue mean better performance, obviously, and the reds and pinks mean weaker performance. And look at that pattern across the state, the variation where you do have the metropolitan areas. I wanted to zoom in on that for everyone, so we made one for Metro Atlanta, more schools on the northern side of the region that have higher test scores. And that pattern holds for some of the other smaller metros like Columbus and Augusta and Savannah as well, that same kind of spatial distribution of school performance, right? And then, of course, you can see the rural areas where you have some good performing schools and you have some schools that aren't scoring quite as high. So very interesting data, but speaks to the future of our economy. And, of course, something we built for the Governor's Office of Student Achievement that we're really proud of is system-level mapping resources where you can go in and look at actual system performance and, of course, compare data. And these visualization tools are very critical because what you're seeing here is actually 8th grade mean math score. And anybody can go to this website and use this mapping resource to make their own maps. And, of course, then what we do is we map students who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. And you see a lot of difference in those two maps, right? So socioeconomic status is a big determinant of educational performance, and that's what these two maps are showing. That how similar they are makes that point, I think, very eloquently, right? And so the final one, taking it up one level to high school graduation scores. So spatial maps showing you red is school systems with the highest. Dots represent city systems, so you can see a place like Decatur called out, little dot there. So you're looking at it hopefully on the printouts pretty well. So in your core metropolitan areas, you have some very strong school system, but there are some in rural areas that have very high school graduation rates as well. And so especially in North Georgia, you see some of the higher performing high school graduation rates per the system scale level. Okay, so that's seeding all this. So when we think about where we are today with respect to education, another, I think, unique map for us is to make a map of share of 25 or older population that have actually a bachelor's degree. So you'll see that those red areas where there's the highest concentration of people with bachelor's degrees is concentrated in Metro Atlanta, and you can see a Metro Atlanta insert here and an insert of the core. But of course, I have a lot of meetings I'm not at right now. In the rural areas, the share of people with a bachelor's degree is obviously much, much lower. And of course, something I think is fascinating is this same type of educational performance data, but now let's look at the metropolitan areas again. So if you're looking at Dalton, which is very much a manufacturing center for the U.S., the share of people that have less than a 9th grade or 9th to 12th degree education is obviously the highest of any metropolitan area in the state. And you can see the variation in that pattern where that share is very low in Hinesville, and Hinesville is obviously critically a military center for the U.S., Fort Stewart, and you can see that. A lot of military people. I was in the Marines, so they're Army. It's Army. It's not Marine Corps, but it's good, right? We're all in it together. And of course, if you want to look at through a high school diploma, then the pattern really flattens out. Okay, so take a second to look at that. So the share of people with just a high school diploma is actually lowest in Atlanta and Athens-Clarke, UGA. And if you look at just graduate degrees, you see big pattern differences there. So there's Dalton, right? And of course, Atlanta has a very high share of people with advanced degrees. But again, look at a place like Warner Robins. Lots of really high-tech manufacturing repair work done around the military operations there. And so, of course, they have very high shares of people with advanced degrees. And, of course, Savannah is a very similar pattern as well, followed by Athens-Clarke County. So we think this is a really interesting way to show this type of data. And if you just look at bachelor's degree or graduate or professional degree, there's Atlanta and Athens-Clarke, followed by actually Savannah. Up here in the top bar is Savannah, and here's Atlanta, and here's Athens-Clarke. And so this feeds household income. This is really share of households that are making less than $25,000. So these are people with the most modest means when it comes to income. Take a second to look at that. There you'll see those shares are smallest actually for Gainesville and Atlanta, and lower middle income. So take a second to look at that, and you'll see Atlanta has a small share there. And we're getting into more income. You see a Warner Robins, and a Hinesville actually has the highest share of total households that are in this middle income range. And again, that's, I think, a function of what the military is paying. And then on the higher income, you see Atlanta and Warner Robins still sticking out. And then when you do the 200,000 plus as a share of total households, Metro Atlanta really stands out because there are obviously a lot of affluent households in metropolitan Atlanta. Now this is fun. Scott made me keep this in. I actually was giving this to another group, but I think it's really fascinating. It's brand new data. Like I just found this data almost by accident, but it's the share a household spends on transportation. So if it's a 100, then you spend what a normal household spends on transportation costs, and that's all in, from your car payment to your gasoline, whatever else it may be. So of course, Metro Atlanta, you spend 7% more than an average household on transportation than a normal household in the U.S. And if you're in Dalton, you're spending 28% less. So it's much more affordable for transportation costs. And this is brand new ESRI data. We do think it's really interesting. Look at your own metropolitan area and see that, yes, transportation is important to Metro Atlanta, and we pay a premium to get around compared to average households. And then all this education and these costs feed into median household income, and you can see where those households that I just talked about at the metropolitan area actually live across the state. And you see the red areas in the Macon, Warner Robins area as well, and around Savannah where you have high-income households as well. And these are mostly concentrated in the metropolitan areas. So how are we doing on jobs? So the state, and this is brand new data, as of November last year, most current, we added 93,000 jobs year over year. Now everybody smile right now. I'm telling you, this has been a great run for Georgia. That we're fifth and we were 8th in population. We're 5th in job change. Shows how strong our economy has been. And I love it to say anything with the jobs above 90, truthfully, because I never thought I would have to talk about jobs numbers during the recession like I talked about. And it feels almost like the 1990s again. The jobs strength has been so good. And we're all really excited about that. But then I'm going to show you some stuff on some wages that's going to be counter to that trend, but we are adding jobs again. It's about the quality of the jobs and what we're doing to work on that in the next few slides. So that state level performance, Georgia's in blue, the U.S. is in orange, so we're finally passing again the nation as a whole in actual job change. And then let's do the metro areas for a second. So this blue bar is total jobs for metropolitan areas in 2000. Here's Metro Atlanta, again on a different scale, so it all makes sense. So look at those numbers differently. And then, of course, how did we do from 00 to 07, right before the recession started? Macon and Albany struggled a little bit. Metro Atlanta did okay. The red bar is actually the height of the recession. Man, it was tough for everybody. Here's Metro Atlanta, different scale, very severe. And, of course, how are we recovering? And, of course, you can see Savannah and Macon actually doing quite well coming out of the recession. And most of the other metros are pretty quiet still, but Macon and Savannah is obviously, I think, from our perspective, doing quite well on the jobs numbers. So this is good recent change in the employment picture for all of our metropolitan areas. But this is new stuff we just put together. This is off-the-shelf stuff from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's per capita income. And of course, Georgia has lagged behind the 10 other largest states, and that's what this other bar is, per capita income average for the 10 other largest states. So there's big cost differences in California and Georgia, right? So that the bar is above the green, okay, that's okay, right? But how does that gap change over time? That's what we're critically focused on. So in 1996, what that actually says is the gap between Georgia and those 10 largest states was $1,900, right? But by 2012, that gap was $7,300. So the gap has increased. That is something that we all need to be aware of and obviously be focused on, right? And so put another way, this is per capita income for the nation and how Georgia has done in growth. And of course, I think the chart speaks for itself. And again, per capita income is going to be driven by wages. So let's think about job growth at the state level, and this is stuff we got from Georgia State that we think is really good. So this is employment growth for the college educated, right? So professional and technical services is a big driver for this state and for metropolitan Atlanta. This is from 9 to 13, so a couple really tough recession years plus 3 more years. And you can see educational services, we were actually losing jobs because it's below this line, and of course the average wage is there. So if you're college educated, the job growth has been pretty good, is what this really shows you. If it's some college, right, then the wages are obviously in a different quadrant, right? And the job growth in some things has been relatively okay in retail and accommodation and food, but again, educational services, even for those, has not been as strong. And of course, high school or less, lots of accommodation and food job growth even coming out of the recession. But again, that is, and that's why this bubble's down at the bottom, those are the lowest wage jobs, right? So they pay the least amount of money. So we've had the strongest growth in sectors with really the smallest wage. So that's a big issue. So what we put together was this, and we think this is pretty interesting. This is wages by occupation growth. So this is coming out of the recession, basically, from 2010 to 2014. So green is high, yellow's middle, and red is low-wage jobs. Look at him taking a camera. We'll send you the PowerPoint. It's okay. We'll give you the PowerPoint, I promise. So we've had some sectors that have done, on the job change, have done quite well. Computer and mathematical, right, has done well. Business and financial operations, those high-wage occupations have been adding jobs. Middle wage is a mixed bag, but across the board, the low-wage jobs, we've been adding jobs. Those are big sectors anyway. You would expect them to add jobs. There's no doubt about it. So what if we look at the wage growth across sectors? And we went and did this research because we saw the per capita income stuff. We were starting to figure out, well, what's really going on in the economy here? And so you've had wage growth in just a couple of sectors. Legal, and of course architectural services over that period. But even in the middle wage and the low wage, actual wages have not really recovered. I think the last 2 years, that will start to bend a little bit. I think we've got positive wage again. But again, this is a challenge. We need to be generating good middle wage jobs, good high income jobs. And I know that's a lot of the work that everybody in the legislature and of course the governor is committed to. And we do a lot of programs at the university level that I think have been great at meeting this challenge. So we've already done a lot of great things that I think are really starting to have a positive impact on that. So one of the questions that came up for us as Metropolitan Atlanta is, well, how are we doing compared to other metros on this one particular issue, right? So growth in low-wage occupations, we're sort of Atlanta on the far left, and then Charlotte, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Minneapolis, typical places we would look at. So we're kind of in the middle of the pack, and this is growth in those occupations. Middle-income occupations. Moving on. And high wage occupations, we're sort of okay, but that middle band compared to the big metros has been interesting. I don't want to, you know, this is stuff that we're going to spend more time working on, I promise you, at the ARC, because we want to understand this in more detail. So this is stuff really nobody else has seen. So final big shift of gears. So we have this burning glass data. We love this data, so we can go see what companies are actually posting for, because that's what you're most interested in. So this is job postings per 10,000 people over the last 10 months. Here is Georgia, 21st in number of job postings per 10,000 people. The District of Columbia is up at the top. And of course, South Dakota. Much smaller state, much smaller population, and as energy prices rise and fall, so will those economies now, right? So what's the number one posted job across the state over the last 12 months? Truck driver. Across the state, truck driver. And truthfully, I was speaking to the Ready Mix Association of Georgia, great crew. And I was listening to them talk, and they said their number one problem is finding drivers. And I know the governor's had a great program to try to incentivize, especially veterans, maybe transitioning into those types of jobs. There's been real wage increases, I think, in that sector, because there is so much demand right now to move goods and services. The economy's strong, and that's a critical thing. Number two is software developers. And that's a great sector, right? And that's very much a Metro Atlanta thing. And we're going to break some of this down by metropolitan area. You're going to love this. I am absolutely fascinated by this data. So this, they call 45,000 websites a day to look at these job postings, deduplicate it in database terms to make sure it's great data. So if you ever have a question about this at the county level, email us and we'll try to put something together for you to help you understand your own community. So take some time to look at that. And I'll go ahead and make my good joke for my 12 and 13-year-old unemployed daughters. This is my recommendation to them. Be a JavaScript programmer that's a registered nurse that likes to drive a truck. Then they'll be taking care of me, right? So that's, if you want to be employed in Georgia, or for that perspective in the U.S. period, if you know JavaScript programmers, you need to email me, because we need them at the ARC as well. So critically, that old economy and new economy are really meeting up right now in these jobs postings, because they're pretty interesting when you look at these different occupations, like business intelligence analysts, right? Security analysts, experts. So that's, you know, the high-tech side, it is wide open right now about what kind of job you can work at. So, and when you think about what people are demanding, it's called up-credentialing. There may have been jobs 30 years ago that you wouldn't have required or asked for a 4-year degree, but now you can. So when you look at our population, this is educational requirement of current postings. 51% require a bachelor's degree, 7% require a graduate level degree, right? So companies are asking for very well educated people to fill these positions that get posted onto the web. And of course, most of our population doesn't have a college degree. Now, that's a skills thing. There's lots of great jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree. Most of the jobs that are still getting posted don't require a bachelor's degree, but these skills and how we're training people coming out of school to meet those challenges is where the rubber meets the road. But businesses are asking for people that are well educated. So you got the printout, flip to this page. This is one of those things that I think is very interesting and unique about this burning glass day is we went ahead and ran reports for every metropolitan area. So on the back end of this PowerPoint, when you download it, are these reports for each metropolitan area. So you get a lot more detail about each of the metros across the state. So you'll see in places like Albany and Athens, heavy truck drivers is #1. In metropolitan Atlanta, it's actually software developers is the #1 posted job. So there's differences in these economies. In Augusta, it's actually registered nurses, right? 2-year degree nurses are going to do quite well there. And of course, if you go down to, I want to find Macon and Rome, most of these are obviously for truck drivers. So again, look at that in some detail and you'll see the differences in the market. And then by industry. And so what do you see when you see the industry level detail, right? Then you start to see hospital units start to pop up. And we talk about having a larger, older population. People are living twice as long. They will demand lots of health care. You can't go wrong majoring in biomedical engineering at Georgia Tech, right? Because there's going to be a lot of demand for health care, and we're going to talk about that. But even Dalton still has textile mills as a critical industry that is actually hiring, because this is about real postings. And the actual names, this is a great thing, the names of people that are hiring. And of course, I was in the Marine Corps. Albany, U.S. Marine Corps is the #2 hiring organization in Albany. And of course, look at these different companies across the board. So you'll see Wellstar in Metro Atlanta was the #1 top employer posting on the web as they moved in and started to do operations in metropolitan Atlanta. And in Augusta, it's University Healthcare. So lots of these are related to the hospital industry, obviously. But if you go down to Savannah, it's Gulfstream, right? And Gulfstream has been great. Those are great middle-income jobs. And so those companies are hiring. So let's see what the future looks like for our metros in this. Please, question.
We're looking at Albany and Newton County Schools. What is that, Albany?
I don't know. I need to look at that. Yeah, I filled it. Well, you're reading. You caught us in an error. You get a gold star. Thank you. That is weird. It happens. All right, so this is same thing. This is metropolitan growth. Maybe Newton, Georgia. Newton schools. No, maybe on the school system, but we'll check into it. We'll definitely fix that. Dougherty County Schools. Okay. All right, so let's see how the metropolitan areas are growing. One of the things I learned along this path is Augusta's the biggest metro. I mean, that's not something you think about until you start really digging the numbers. You know, it's the largest metro by a long shot, and so this data is going to show how our metros are going to change over time. So let's stay with it. So this is the 1970s. There's Augusta growing. Here comes Savannah. Savannah passes Columbus in the 1990s. Here comes Gainesville. And I'm moving these around, but clearly Augusta in the forecast is expected to add the most jobs and the most population. But Savannah and Columbus are in that first tier, right? And so that's the growth rate in the forecast. Now this is aging. This is share of 65-year-olds. So as it moves over in the 1980s, we get a little younger through the 90s, and then here comes the baby boomers. Lots of people getting older in this forecast. And guess who's the youngest? Hinesville, obviously, because they get to reset their demographic profile every 4 years, right? Yeah. And so this is per capita income and GRP. And again, when you get this PowerPoint, all you have to do is hover over and hit play as well. So there goes Augusta on GRP, but Savannah and Columbus actually has the highest per capita income in our forecast. So yeah, just a quick, easy way in a couple minutes to show you really 8 good variables of demographic forecast change. So we're almost there. Other big thing we need to know about is the labor force participation rate continues to decline, and we expect it to decline in our forecast. And so what we did with this chart is try to show you labor force participation rate, how many people are considered in the workforce, and what that'll look like out to over 2040. So of course, orange is all races, and then we put the individual bars up. See, Hispanic has the highest labor force participation rate. That's been true historically, and we expect that to continue in the future. But across the board, the share of people, as we have more people in the older age groups, the labor force participation rate is going to go down, and people equal economy, so that sets an expectation for future growth. So here's the state employment forecast. So in 1990, the largest sector of employment in the state was manufacturing, right? And of course, followed by state and local and retail trade. So how does that change up to the current day? Well, we lost 130,000 manufacturing jobs. Productivity, all those things are a big factor in manufacturing, but we added 355,000 healthcare jobs in that same period. So strong growth there, pretty strong growth in retail trade, lots of growth in administrative and waste management services, the worst titled sector in the history of employment sector titles, but that's really about part-time business services. So those are mostly part-time jobs. And of course, what does the future look like? And why do my daughters have to go to medical school? Because we expect in our forecast that the largest sector in 2040 is going to be healthcare. You see that already in the burning glass data, right? Associated with all those healthcare jobs that are being posted already as 10,000 baby boomers hit 65 every day. So healthcare will be the largest sector in 2040, and that's what you see on this chart. So there are some sectors that aren't growing by jobs, but that doesn't mean that the economy of that sector isn't growing, and that's what this final chart shows you. So the red bar is the total economic output for different sectors, and then I put the job change as a percentage there. So you'll see manufacturing. The manufacturing sector is expected to grow by 60% in total economic output over the period, but we will not add jobs to do that, and that's a function of productivity, and that's a critical thing to understand. As we get better and leverage computer technology and automate manufacturing processes, you necessarily will have less people doing that kind of work. So most of the job change is in relatively labor-intensive sectors like construction, but it doesn't mean that these sectors that aren't adding jobs aren't adding a lot to the state economy, and that's what we expect. So that's a critical understanding for all of us when we think about economic development in the future, that this company-level activity is so critical. Now, one last thing. I'm supposed to make a joke here. What am I supposed to say? So after you passed the bill last year, we went and pulled some data that we thought was really interesting. I never thought I'd get to. I've counted toilets. I have seriously counted toilets in my job because we didn't know how many toilets we could retrofit in Metro Atlanta. It's one a proud day when you can tell people how many toilets there are in Cobb County. We've done a similar thing with hotels. So you wonder where the hotels are, and some of this I think, I hope you find this interesting. So we counted the total number of hotel rooms using a commercial data set, Smith Travel Research, to put this in context. So this is actual spatial data, so there's a lot of extra detail on here. But in the city of Atlanta alone, there are 22,000 hotel rooms. I know tourism is a big deal. But the city of Savannah is not to be outdone, right? There are 9,000 hotel rooms in Savannah. I didn't really have a context or scale for how big that is. So if you look at unincorporated Cobb, there's 8,500, so there's a lot of hotel rooms up there, and DeKalb as well. And then Augusta, Richmond, man, the Masters, that is an economic engine, right? When you see those 6,300 rooms there, you know there's a lot of economic activity associated with tourism there as well. So this is just a fun way, I think, to end it. We're counting hotel rooms and toilets at the ARC. So, fun data. Thank you so much for your time. And as always, just email us with questions. We're happy to.
Do you have time to take a few questions?
We absolutely do.
Well, Mr. Alexander, first off, I want to thank you for being here today, and Mr. Haggard, same thing. And thanks for all the hard work you've put into this data. Do you have any questions? If you would, just hit your mic, hit your button. Anybody have questions?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well,
No questions. I've got just one quick question. On that slide was 7% more we spend on transportation. Is that when you look at other regions like Dallas? I know you've checked Dallas, Houston, and Charlotte. Is there a correlation between the amount of transit in a metro area and cost of transportation? Is there? I don't know if I'm asking the question correct, but do you follow what I'm saying?
I absolutely do, and in fact, that's probably something we could fill out with this data because they do have transit costs, like how much people are spending on transit as well.
I'd like
so
to
I don't
get
know
that,
the answer, but we could look.
I
it
know
up.
Dallas has added light rail, and so has Charlotte, and I think Houston's added some transit, and we have not had any really major expansion of transit in the past 20 years, and I'd like to see if their numbers are different.
Okay.
If you could find that out.
Yeah, absolutely. We can certainly email you some summary data
All
on
right,
that.
number 10. Who's
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Yeah.
I had a question here in the Metro Atlanta thing. Speak to the fact that the growth in the middle income occupation in Atlanta is so far below other major metropolitan areas, with the exception of probably Chicago. But what's the factor there?
You know, I think one of the things you have to be aware of is we're still recovering from a recession. Metro Atlanta for a while did really great on construction, and construction is considered a middle income sector actually by real wages. So we haven't recovered on that, but we honestly don't have enough detail at this point. We're still working on this data to kind of flesh out what's the critical part in understanding how those sectors really haven't been generating jobs in the same way. A lot of it probably is, to some degree, our own recovery from the recession, but it's a great question that I really truthfully can't answer accurately for you at this point.
I was going to ask you next. It's my follow-up after
Yes,
I heard you was, didn't the rest of the country experience the same recession, or were we the only state that got hit? Because, you know, last I checked, we were all in this thing together. But it looks like they're coming out much quicker than the rest of the country is. And I think until we're able to address why, and when we won't be really able to effectively address how to going forward.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And it's something, again, I think we've got a charge to go back and do more work, which is what we got to do to understand these changes. I think one of the things to point out, Dallas and Houston have done quite well because of high energy prices. There's no doubt about that. They have been growing quite rapidly as a result. And with falling energy prices, we're already starting to see some trend differences for them.
Yeah, I want to see your chart
So,
next year with Houston with gas under $2. They should be right up there shaking hands with us.
Yes, sir. We'd love to come back and show you next year that chart. If that's a charge, we would love to do it. Thank you so much.
Representative Braddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was reading something a few days ago about we're back into a recession. Have you looked at any data forward-looking that would show, I don't know what their indicators were, I don't remember, but I remember reading that we are back in a recession. And have you seen that?
Truthfully, ma'am, no, we haven't. I
Okay.
mean, we've had pretty solid growth. It's definitely slowing down. I think the stock market has been something everybody's talked about this year as something that's slowed down dramatically. But
Well, I know this looks through 2014, so
yeah.
if you
Yes, ma'am.
in forward-looking data, I didn't know if you'd had a chance to look at any of that.
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Chairman, do you have any questions? Anything else? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the last thing I wanted to leave you with is that we have district level information that we have for every district, legislative district in Georgia for all your districts. So when we send out the information with the link to the PowerPoint, I'll also send out the location where you can find district-specific information, and it will have a lot of the demographic and economic information, some of the stuff we've talked about here that's unique to your district. So you'll be able to delve into specifics in your district that might be informative when working with your constituents. So we'll make sure you get that too.
Well, thank you very much. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you all for being here, and we are adjourned.